Welcome to the very first episode of the Cranmore Community Co-op series of podcasts. This series is titled The Harmony of History. These podcasts describe lectures and stories of shared history in conversation with members of many different types of religious communities in Sligo and guest lecturers. These series of podcasts are supported and funded through the International Fund for Ireland under the Peace Impact Programme. Marcella, McGarry and artist Ken Gunning will take you through a series of recorded workshops, talks and lectures held in Cranmore and Sligo. We are delighted to have as our first episode guest local historian Dr. Fiona Gallagher. Dr. Gallagher is a native of Sligo town and has a long-abiding interest in the urban fabric and development of the town and urban morphology. Fiona is also the author of the Streets of Sligo, Urban Evolution over the Course of 7 Centuries, and co-author of the Royal Irish Academy's Historic Town Atlas of Sligo. Dr. Gallagher's lecture focused on the cholera epidemic of 1832, in which hundreds of people died and thousands fled the town. This talk took place only a few weeks prior to the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, and the timing is obviously poignant due to the tantamount similarities between these two epidemics. We are still under stay-at-home government regulations as we begin this series, and we sincerely hope you are keeping safe and well during these unprecedented times, and hope you enjoy the first episode.
I kind of go through it. So, just to talk, the Great Cholera epidemic of 1832 was the most virulent pestilence to reach the shores of Ireland since the Black Death. That's in the Middle Ages. And it's almost forgotten now, but in its day, in 1832, it killed over 50,000 people on the island of Ireland. And it was totally eclipsed by the tragedy of the famine. But the impact of cholera and its legacy on Irish towns is largely understudied and forgotten. And that's what I'm actually trying to do at the minute. I'm trying to kind of research the 1832 epidemic in the context of all the provincial towns in Ireland. So that will take me a while. Sligo was arguably one of the worst hit towns in the islands, with a mortality rate equal to that of many major urban areas in Britain, despite the fact that they had more population. And so what we're going to have a quick look at, I suppose, is the horrifying experiences of Sligo, and we give some consideration to the context of the period as well. So the little points there, normally when I'm giving a lecture, people like to read points when I'm talking and stuff behind. So feel free to read. It doesn't take from what I'm saying. And that's a lovely shot of Sligo Town and Martin's Quay in around 1803. That's St. John's Church on the right there. And further on in the picture is the Abbey on it. And you can have a quick read on that. So, and while you're reading that, I'll just be telling you about what happened in the background. So what is cholera? You know, it's often been referred to as the classic disease of the 19th century, and it's characterised by epidemic outbreaks, and it was frequently cited as the cause of popular agitation and social unrest, as well as being instrumental in the drive for municipal reform of public health in the 19th century. And historically, cholera only referred to a severe type of gastroenteritis, which was characterised by vomiting and diarrhoea. And that old type of cholera was what's called an endemic form. Endemic means at low level, as opposed to epidemic, which is at terrifying level. This epidemic sort of gastroenteritis was common during the spring and summer in Ireland, and it was rampant in built-up areas in towns and villages, towns and kind of small cities. It wasn't a particularly severe disease, and it was known by many names, but the most common name that it was referred to in the record was simply the fever. And that was how it was characterised. But after 1830, or after about 1820, cholera came to mean Asiatic, or what's called spasmodic cholera, and it was genuinely a pandemic. And this, of course, Asiatic cholera came out of Asia. And so what it was, the new epidemic, what is it, or how does it spread? It's an acute waterborne diarrheal disease, and it's caused by a bacterium which is called Vibrio cholerae, something terribly Latin. And of course, this is a microbe which wasn't identified until 1883, and lack of medical understanding in the 1830s was a huge factor in causing its spread. They simply didn't know how it spread. The disease terrified the public because you progressed rapidly from being extremely well to dying within 24 hours. And it had the same fear factor of the Black Death in a way that the illnesses and fevers at the time of the famine didn't have, because they were diseases of wasting, diseases of hunger. This was rapid. You could get it at 12 o'clock in the day and be dead at 12 o'clock the next day. It was so rapid. And so the process, anybody who's kind of, if you've ever done a bit of nursing or anything like that, you know that there's vectors or routes of transmission, and there's processes. How does the the bacteria, how does it get transmitted from person to person? And of course we all know that if you wanted one child to have the measles, they put the other child in beside it. That was how it worked.
Yeah.
We do it now, but it was very effective at the time. But in 1832, the route of transmission was contaminated water and the oral fecal route. And oral fecal is just a nice way of saying that with the diarrheal disease, it's literally, if you've ever had belly, if you've ever had a very severe bout, we laugh a little bit about diarrhea, but it's exceptionally dangerous. And that's what caused the huge infant mortality rate right up until the 1940s in Ireland. Small babies in gastroenteritis. Massive 80% of babies who died before their first birthday died of that because there was no real way of antibiotics, no way to do it. So in the 1830s, what happened in Sligo was, you passed your motions, you couldn't stop, they were watery, they literally took the inside of your bowel, which it is a particularly awful disease. The stool looked like rice water, it was called a rice water stool, and this caused a massive loss of fluid from the body, and often they bled as well, and that was even more blood loss. That was, so when you did your business and it flowed into the gutters, it flowed into the street, it was impossible to keep yourself clean. There was no running hot water, and people would eat food and the process starts all over again. Highly infected. And I think, in case you think it can't happen today, of course it can, because in 2000, and that's a wonderful graphic of cholera sweeping through Europe and taking mostly the poor, because the poor were probably the worst affected, but it knew no social bounds, the cholera. Today, I'm going to say, in case you think cholera can't happen today, in 2011, the earthquake in Haiti, they sent in lots of soldiers from around the world, and a group of Nepalese Gurkhas came from Nepal, set up camp. The camps were very poor. They had latrines that didn't go into the ground, and the latrines went into the river, and the Nepalese soldiers were carrying what's called an endemic form of cholera, which was kind of prevalent in Kathmandu. It didn't really affect them too bad, but because the Haitians had no immunity to it, when it went into the water from the pit latrine, they drank the water out of the river and it went like wildfire, and that's what caused it. So it can happen today. It's the only thing that's stopping you or me or Marcella from getting it is because we actually live in very hygienic conditions. But if that broke down, we'd be all on the same boat. And of course, it came from Bengal. It spread through India through troop movement, because the British government moved the troops around India on a very frequent basis, and everywhere that the troop movement, and they didn't follow it, it spread, it infected the local populace, and then it moved on again because the troops moved on. By 1830 it had reached Moscow, and so if we reach Europe, you can read through that. We won't bore you with it. And it was a very virulent, and it caused Europeans great fear because its mortality rates approached those of the plague. But cholera, paradoxically enough, was not the 19th century biggest killer, and the death rates were actually exceeded by the TB epidemic and the various fevers which swept throughout Ireland during that period. And the Asiatic cholera had been spreading westward from India since 1817. It often travelled, as we said, by troops, but also in the bilge water of merchant ships. And of course, all Britain was a huge merchant trader during the 19th century. Its ports were full, and so were Irish ports. So it was only a matter of time before it got to Britain and Ireland. And in Britain, despite the quarantine measures, and we all know what quarantine does, the cholera reached Britain via Hamburg on the 23rd of October 1831, and it was a boatman from Sunderland became the first victim of the cholera because he left the ship that was under quarantine and sneaked ashore, and they were able to prove that afterwards. And the disease spread very quickly throughout Britain over the next few months, and arrived in London in March 1832. Arrived in London in the late 1831, and then Belfast in March 1832. And I like this lovely little drawing. The Board of Health we talked about. The Board of Health was called the Cholera Board, but because they didn't know how it spread, they thought there was two camps. Was it a miasma? In other words, was it this big cloud, gassy cloud coming out of the sewers and out of the rotting vegetables and food, or did it pass from person to person? In other words, was it like typhus? So typhus is spread by fleas and louses. And I remember my mother even talking in the 30s, before they moved into Streets of Sligo. She lived in a thatched house on Nassau Road, but they used to visit people who lived with a very poor row of houses off John Street, Ramsey's Row. And she had a school friend there, she used to go around, and it isn't the 30, it's 2034 maybe, they got infected with lice. And the sanitary officer came around and took out all the bedding was straw, and there was huge ructions anyways, and those people in Ramsey's Row were the first people to get the new houses. Some of them went to St. Anne and some of them went to Jinx's Avenue. But so typhus spread by lice. Now this wasn't typhus in the 30s, but so typhus it has very similar symptoms to cholera, but you don't have the same diarrhea with it. But even today, if you're in a third world country, typhus is quite a killer. So they didn't know how. They thought maybe it was passed by tick to tick, but it wasn't. It was passed literally from not washing your hands and re-ingesting the pathogen again. So this is the Board of Health. It doesn't know what to do. It's taking blue pills. It's taking emetics. It's literally sitting on top of the skeleton there. So and the poor cholera patient is kind of wasting away really. And it's the symptoms that I think. Anybody bored yet? No,
not yet.
So I don't want to drive me out mad. So what are the symptoms? So it was the physical nature, as we said, that horrified the populace. Once contracted, the symptoms of cholera included stomach cramp, looseness of the bowels, vomiting, severe pain in the limbs, and really bad dehydration. If left untreated, death would come within hours of the first symptoms. The physical appearance of sufferers, according to the London Gazette of October 1831, appeared, quote, sharp and contracted, the eye sinks, the look is expressive of terror and wildness, the skin is deadly cold and often damp, the tongue is always moist, often white and loaded, but flabby and chilled like a piece of dead flesh. So I think that's just kind of says all you want to know. And often victims would present first of all with symptoms similar to food poisoning with sort of painless diarrhea, and then that could quickly progress to this thing called rice water, which you really don't want to see, And they would just vomit and pass food at the same time. And if you've even ever had a mild, I've had Shigella in Kenya a couple of times, and you really, the pain of that, it's just, the physical pain of it, but also the sheer weakness, and I had medication for it, but I picked it up from some of the hospitals I was working in. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's particularly bad. But you can imagine what it was like in the 1830s if you already were living in very poor conditions, And people progressed. It was often called the Blue Death because people progressed. You can see this lad here. This is a drawing from the Wellcome Collection. His lips and his eyes are blue, and he's very sort of shrunken looking. And when you went to the blue state, you weren't far from death. Why were you blue? Because the volume of blood in your body, because you lose so much fluid, the heart can't pump it efficiently. So you're not getting oxygenated. And you literally, your lack of fluids. The first thing if you have an accident, you're given fluids. It doesn't matter even if you lose blood, you always have fluids, because that keeps your system, the circulatory system going. So it wasn't a particularly nice disease. This is a cartoon from the time, and it's called the Cholera Morbus. Morbus was another title for it. So you've all these sort of quacks, and this is John Bull is the sort of the cartoon character for English. You're familiar with that, but he's been examined by all these doctors and for different things, and they can't figure out what they're going to give and what they're going to do. So in the overcrowded cities and towns of Ireland, it was very easy for hands and feet to come into contact with contaminated excrement, and then for the bacteria to be ingested orally. But it was the contaminated water that was the dangerous vector of the disease. And cholera had a very high morbidity and mortality rate. So morbidity is effectively where you get quite sick with it, and mortality then, and that's their kind of standard medical measurements, morbidity and mortality. And both rates were very high. You could have a low morbidity rate but a high mortality rate, or vice versa. But this one was high in both cases, and that was one of its signature features. And it's really hard to be accurate about the true number of deaths in Ireland from the 1832 epidemic. So some are wild guesses, some are live. In excess of 50,000 people died, probably much more than that. And that's a lot. So where did it come from? It came south from Belfast. So the first case we had was in around March 1832 from Belfast. Belfast being like a really big, busy port. That was just before the Harlan and Wolfe stuff, just before Belfast sort of exploded in this sort of large industrial town that didn't happen in other parts of Ireland. Dublin had the first case in March 1832, and by the 5th of July they had 1,500 deaths. And by Christmas there were 4,500 dead. Now remember, Dublin's a big city. Sligo had almost, I put it at, the official numbers for Sligo are 700. I would put it at closer to 1,000 out of a population of 15,000. That's a huge mortality rate. And that's why Sligo was so badly affected, more so than the other cities. So it spread fast. How did it spread, do you think? No railways, no cars. And one of the reasons that we know it spread fast is because one of the first things that was done in every town was they identified the wandering beggars, and there was thousands of them in Ireland because they were effectively landless labourers who were moving from town to town in the 1830s. And so if you were from a town, you had to be badged, and we see that later on. But it's a really good indication of how mobile the Irish poor were, in the fact that the disease was in Westport and then 3 days later it was in Castlebar, and 3 days later it was in Ballina. So we don't think that people could move around that much in the 1830s, but in actual fact they moved huge distances on foot. You know, So I mean, if you want to walk from Boyle to Sligo, it will take you about 8 hours or 6 hours. You know, in your house. Not that bad, really, if you've nothing else to do all day. You know,
Me a year.
you know, in your prime.
No, but even into 19. I was born 55 to 60. I can remember men used to come, and my father would give them a day's work.
Yes.
And they were gone the next day. They didn't want any longer.
No, they were kind of moving labourers, travelling labourers.
They worked the day, stayed the night, and moved on.
And they knew where all the fairs and the marts were. So the disease was carried from town to town by vagrants and beggars. They were looking really for relief from distress. Distress was a general term for, not having a lot. That's just a little map, and it's not awfully clear, but I hope you can see it. And I don't particularly like that map, but I don't really think it spreads the way that the map thinks it spread, right? So I'm going to do my own new map from my own research, and I'll present it to you next year, right? But you get the general idea. Sunderland, for any of you familiar with Newcastle on Tyne, that's the whole Sunderland area. And that was a massive port. That was the main entry port for all the Baltic trade from Hamburg. And what came out of the Baltic was timber. So all the timber in Sligo, up from 1800 on, all came from the Baltic. It was all Norwegian and Swedish and Finnish timber, and even Russian timber. And we don't really think of the timber coming from that far, but it actually did. And then you can see the little arrow saying where it spread. And again, it came in from London as well too. So that's just kind of a rough map to give you an idea, but it also kind of clarifies in your mind how the stuff spread. And just so Ireland, why did cholera? Excuse me, why? That's a cholera consultation. So the Central Board of Health, for the duration of the cholera, became known as the Cholera Board. And this is one of these wonderful caricatures as well. They're feasting with their turkey and their ham and wine and pork. And there's all the new cases and cases made in whatever, and the list of things to do. But this was what the population in general thought of the Board of Health. But in actual fact, they did a lot more than that. That's a little bit. They're like a political cartoon today. I think Boris Johnson doing Brexit. It's a big difference. Are we doing all right? Nobody too well. And I'm trying to keep it relatively light without being overly heavy. So why did cholera have such an impact in Ireland? So Ireland provided a fertile ground in the 1830s for the spread of fever. The physical condition of the people, both rural and urban, was generally poor following the severe typhus epidemic of 1818 and the mini famine of 1821-22, which we've kind of forgotten about. And those two events left scarcity and hunger in their wake. The decade before the cholera epidemic was marked by regular local outbreaks of famine and fever, leaving an entire class of people weak for the want of sustenance and easy prey to disease. And in fact, the typhus epidemic which was 1818, left almost 45,000 dead, which was almost equivalent to the death toll of the cholera, but it didn't strike the same level of fear into the populace. And so the connection between famine and fever was well understood, and successive periods of wet summers in Ireland between 1821 and 1830 had resulted in food shortages and low availability of turf. And of course, low availability of turf led to difficulty in heating homes, in heating water for washing clothes and bodies, and that created an atmosphere rife for the spread of infection. So if you don't wash the clothes, everything gets ingrained into them. If you don't wash the bedding, their bedding was ticks, kind of your average teenager wouldn't have a notion what that is after their feather duvet, but there were mattresses that were made out of straw often and covered in a sort of a wrap.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Straw horse.
So even during a period of minor famine, thousands of people were reduced to begging and vacancy, and this helped spread the disease from town to town. And I suppose, given the scope of your project, looking at what was the context, we tend to think very locally and very much Ireland, but you want to look at the bigger context. What sort of stage did this play out on? So the economic and political state of Ireland in 1830 was that of a country in great flux. It was an era of Irish economic malaise or depression, which was heralded by the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. When the Napoleonic Wars ended, the demand for Irish agricultural goods plummeted, so that sent a lot of people into unemployment. Significantly, following the Act of Union in 1801, Ireland was subject to intensified competition from British imports after 1815. And the abolition of the Irish pound and the Irish exchequer in 1816 just hastened the depression in prices and a drop in exports. And full free trade with Ireland was allowed from 1824, and that left Ireland's small-scale and domestic industries highly vulnerable in a more competitive age. And we never really think about that. Did you know there was an Irish exchequer in 1820? No. Did we know there was an Irish pound? Did we know that there was tariff barriers between Ireland and Britain up until 1824? So once those tariff barriers went, no more than happened, I suppose, really in the 50s and 60s, didn't either go either way. The hugely industrialised, because that's just at the start of the mass industrialisation in Britain. So, for example, the small weavers in Sligo couldn't compete with the industrial loom in the British North. So simply, you couldn't compete with it. So, the Irish woolen industry collapsed utterly after 1824, and British imports more than doubled in the following decade. So, all of this resulted in a huge level of poverty. And politically, the period was dominated by O'Connell. Catholic emancipation had been granted in 1829, and Catholic emancipation, I suppose, forms some of the backdrop to this, whereby, there was freedom of worship for Catholics and dissenters. Dissenters were non-conformists, non-Anglicans. There was freedom of worship from them really from the 1780s onwards, but they still couldn't stand in Parliament and they couldn't be elected to any of the local corporations until 1829. And then following that, the whole background to the cholera is governed by the tithe wars. Now, you're familiar with the tithe wars. The tithe was a tenth of your wages that had to be paid to the state church. And that was fine in Britain with everybody with Anglican, or most people were Anglican, and you were paying them to the Church of England. Here, of course, it caused great friction, huge friction. And that was compounded by a lot of internal reform that was going on in Anglicanism at the time. And so, against the backdrop of all this, really, you have there's a kind of an undertone of sectarianism where the tithe wars, people were holding back tithes from the local church, and then that resulted in a lot of conflict, really across the board. It was part of a political campaign as well. And after that period, the campaign for repeal of the Union, O'Connell's great monster meeting. So this is playing out against that whole backdrop, and that's what Dublin Capital is looking at. It's looking at this massive epidemic going around, but it's also looking at this huge political convulsion that's going on at the same time. So you have to keep that in mind. One of the things for those of the original folklore, Irish society, which had a very unique pattern of social conduct, poor sanitary condition, but great friendliness toward the neighbour and great hospitality of taking in the wandering stranger. If somebody came to your door in the 1830s looking for a night's bed, you gave it to them and you let them share the food. That hospitality, we talk about Irish hospitality, but it did have a huge cultural routine, I suppose. But all these rambling house visits, going to the next house for music, and particularly attendance at wakes. Attendance at wakes was a huge issue because people would move from the dead house, where somebody might have died of cholera, to another dead house, to another house, and then they just bring the whole thing with them. And there was huge effort to stop people having wakes during the cholera, And cholera struck hard and very erratically. It skipped whole towns, and then in other cases, it infected one town, missed another, and went on to infect the town after it as well. So, what was Sligo like at the time of the cholera? So it was, what would you have experienced if you were living in Sligo in the period leading up to the epidemic? In the first quarter of the 19th century, a traveller's impression of Sligo was of a very compact core, nestled at the foot of its surrounding hills, bounded by the sea to the west and Lough Gill to the east, and bisected by the river. Very much a description you're familiar with today. In 1836, it was the third largest port on the western seaboard after Limerick and Galway, and was described as the chief mart of the northwest of Ireland, and had the look of a place of some consequence, which I hope is a good thing. It had a very wide retail trade, and Sligo also had extensive warehouses on the docks containing groceries, clothes, cottons and cutlery, all imported through the busy quays. And we have that little picture of the quays there. When I wanted to have a look at that's a slightly bigger picture than the one I had earlier. See the quay in the middle, that's Martin's Quay, which is where the glass house, that big 13-storey local built. But most of you remember, like me, when Martin's Quay was just a quay, right? On the right is the Tower of St. John, and in the kind of the fold of the drawing you can see the Tower of the Abbey. But what's most interesting to me is up on the left, the little houses on the hill. And they are the thatched houses, and that was a very poor area and continued to be right up until the 30s, as did most of the lanes and the periphery outside the main streets of the town. So the rapid growth of Sligo after 1795, the massive increase in population, brought problems associated with population living close together in dilapidated housing. The town was considered to be dirty and unsanitary, and the river was grossly polluted by sewerage and by effluent from industrial processes like soap boiling and tanning. The pollution was also destroying the salmon in the river. Sligo's urban population in 1831 was just over 15,000 people. Not a lot different, it's about 20 today, it's not a huge amount different. But there was almost 3,000 families living in just 2,300 houses. And much of the housing stock, so if you think 15,000 people into 2,300 houses, that's a lot of people in each house. You know, and you know yourself, even growing up, I mean, I lived in a small house with other people coming outdoors. I mean, and it was even more crowded in the older houses. And much of the housing stock was third or fourth class. Fourth class is like a hovel, and I have some pictures to show you later. Many Irish small towns in the mid-19th century were actually a refuge for the poor and almost like a rural add-on to an urban area. The houses of the poor were little more than cabins and were always to be found on the periphery of the town and in the lane. And of course these families lived in conditions which made the resistant fever minimal and spread of fever easy. So Sligo, that is a map of Sligo from 1837. Hasn't changed a lot. You can see kind of Old Market Street, High Street, Castle Street, Abbey Street. I mean, for me, when I look at this, what I think is Sligo, St. John's on the left, you can see the jail on the right-hand side of the Abbey Quarter. And for those of you that know where the Mailcoat Road is, you can see Gallows Hill and coming down to the Mailcoat Road. I don't know, I can't do it on that, but you can just pop over this. This is Mailcoat Road here, and then Gallows Hill, and then all down the quays, hold on. And that's Barrack Street and Fort Hill, that's the barracks. And then the Green Fort is here, Fort Hill House, Stephen Street, there's no Connaughton Road obviously, Colliery Church of Ireland, and the old distillery at the riverside, and then this huge complex of the jail, the courthouse, the Roman Catholic chapel, which was, you remember the old Mercy School at the bottom of Chapel Hill, that was actually the chapel, and then various sort of industrial stuff. And then the peculiar route that people don't often think about, why does it go like that? It's because of the big hills. Think if you're coming up out of town, if you're like me every day, coming up High Street or going up the hill, Sligo is literally in a hollow, and that determines the geography of it. And that also meant that everything flowed into the river. And if you're bringing your water out of the river, it's going to be contaminated, So there were several public buildings of note, including the old courthouse in Correction Street, which is now Teelan Street, St. John's Parish Church of Ireland, the Catholic Chapel, which was also called St. John's, at the bottom of Chapel Hill. The penal era Dominican Friary was tucked away in Pan Street, which is right behind my house, that's still there. And there was a substantial military barracks, which was rebuilt in the 1820s on top of Fort Hill. A second Anglican church was erected on the Mall in 1823, Colliery Church, beside the charter school, and there were at least 3 primary schools in town. In terms of health, a new county infirmary was built on the Mall in 1816, and the Fever Hospital followed soon after. And the little red circle on the map beside the green fort, I should enlarge that section of the map. And some of you will remember the infirmary. And that's just looking up. Let's just give you an idea of what Sligo was. That's really a fantastic photograph, because that's the buildings of the town kind of clumped together in the hollow. That's taken from the spire of St. John's Church. around 1890. So if you're looking down there are those red brick houses where Eamon McGarry is in John Street, okay? And to the left, that big warehouse to the left, that was there until a few years ago, where Tesco and Johnson Court is now. That was there until quite recently. That was built in 1820, and that was used as a workhouse, a soup kitchen during the famine. You can see the church on the Mall, and you can see the way the street sort of winds along. And down here on the very bottom here, you can see where the houses are actually attached. And that's about 1899. I think that's a fantastic picture because until recently, that was really what the town was like, very closely nestled, you know. And I talked to you about these houses then. These particular ones, that's Cranmore Road. I think that'd be particularly, I know this is 1913, but the houses literally really didn't change an awful lot between those periods. And these are very unique photographs I came across by chance. Now, let me tell you, where is that? If you're standing, which way is it? So you know how the road forks at St. John, where it used to fork, and one was the jail road, and the right-hand fork is Cranmore Road, okay? If you were standing sort of at the entrance to Chapel Street, looking along the right fork, that's what you're looking at. Those houses would have been on the left-hand side, all the way from the fork, where the old fork used to be in the road.
St. Joachim's and St. Anne's.
So St. Joachim's would be kind of behind it again.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, that's in the triangle. Actually, I'll show you on the map. Is this interesting stuff, guys?
Yes.
Yeah. No, because I'll show you where those houses, you can actually see them on this map here. So when you come in here, you come out of Chapel Street, there's the old chapel, and this is Cranmore Road. And what had happened at this stage, the road to the jail had not been built at that stage. So these houses, they would have been opposite what would have been the convent there, where Dunn Stores and that is now. And
Was the convent there at that time? Was the convent?
No, the convent wasn't there until the 1840s, right?
All right.
The chapel was the far side of, it's where the
Cheshire Homes is now, and that was there. That chapel was there from probably the 1780s, and
there was a second chapel that was built there.
Yeah, the first chapel was
And then there's a good story, you know the story about how it was built.
built around the old one. Yeah, they built a new one around the old one.
School though, Joe, was it?
No,
Separate to the school.
no, do you know what the orphanage used to be?
Yeah.
Yeah, down there. So I think these are remarkable photographs because there's quite a lot of reports that go on with these. There was what would you call it, inquiry in Sligo in 1913, and it was called the Dublin Housing Inquiry. But the Dublin, it was just kind of the name of it. They actually did inquiries around the different provincial towns, and Sligo Corporation at the time got someone who got to take photographs. The only town that did, and you know, these were sitting in the back of a book somewhere until I kind of came across them. So some of you may have seen them before, but Joe might be one. But this is pretty bad. And at the inquest, there's lots of people, and the names I know. I mean, there's one Callahan James. I think it's James Callahan on the hill actually, and he's one of this is his house, and that's like 1913, and that house was still there in 1932. And I think James Callahan was one of the first people, and I can't really figure out what Callahan he is because there's so many Callahans. Yeah, and he was one of the first people to get one of the new houses in the behind the barracks wall. Because this is what he lived in 1930. We're still there 20 years later.
Street.
Yeah. So that would have been up nearly opposite the barracks. So, you know, this is shocking in 1913, but it was exactly the same 90 years previously, you know.
And all the kids with no shoes on.
No kids had no shoes on. I mean, this is like nine years, and you know, I mean, they're not all his kids. I just think they're those type of photographs are quite, and there's another one that's not in it exactly. My own grandfather was born in James Street. They were slightly better houses, not in this lecture, but we get to them again. Now, why is it not moving there? Hold on. Now, what you're looking at here is John Street, and these are better quality housing. So, if you can imagine where, if you're looking from St. John's Terrace or St. John's Church, looking down. Double story thatched, good quality house. See the woman at the door with her apron on, right?
Yeah.
And see the gas light over the door next door to it. Where they are now, does anybody know where, is it Impact? That is
that's over to the left hand side there.
Yeah.
Declan Byrne is above that now.
Exactly, that's what it is. And I'm not sure if those double story houses are still there, but you see the line of washing behind, and the gardens by
And
the
the garden was all
set.
So some of the town would have been good quality housing like this, but
That was 1898.
That's 1898.
And they were that good.
They were
And
that
then you
good.
go to the other one then.
1930, but that was people who were just, poverty. The actual.
They were the poor areas.
Yeah. Well, if you weren't working, the vast majority of poor labourers in town worked on a day-to-day rate. If there was no shipping, if there was no work going on, if there was no work happening, there was no work. There was no system.
There was no dole money.
There was no dole money. And it's hard for us to kind of get around
And
that.
sorry, can I stop it there, Fiona?
Yeah.
The 1913 photograph, the
Yeah.
Cranmore Road there wasn't any of Chapel Street, any photographs of Chapel Street?
No, these were particularly, there was James Street where my grandfather lived, there was Duck Street, there was Cranmore Road, there was the hill, the one on Barry. There was about 6 photographs, one on Gallows Hill as well. And they were literally plates, difficult enough to print on plates at the end of this Dublin housing report. And they, as I said, I came across them by nobody had kind of put them out.
The reason I asked the question was because my side of Chapel Street,
Yeah.
that's the barrack side of it,
Yeah.
they were built in 2 sections. They're actually houses much older than my house, and my house was built in 1919.
Yeah.
And number 6, 1 to 6 was built in 1919.
But the houses.
But there was a 1 to 12 before that,
Yeah.
and they were a good bit further back.
Yeah.
The front gardens. The front gardens on both sides of Chapel Street.
Yeah, and
Was there?
they would have been, and then the left hand side of like over the left hand side of Chapel Street, there might have been very small gardens from the lane was definitely narrower.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
I'd say it was about half the width of this room. The garden.
Yeah, that was-
Anthony McGarry is the shop now, where if any ever been in getting stuff repaired, we can show you where the old front wall was.
Okay, that'd be interesting to have a look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the school at the end, the St. Anne's Club actually had another garden in front of it. That's brilliant. That's good. So what were we looking at? We're looking really at the medical situation in Sligo. So what was there? Sligo had been visited by severe fever in 1817, and then as we talked about, the famine in 22-3. So medical personnel in the town were very used to the pattern of frequent outbreaks of fever, dysentery, and most of all the overwhelming poverty of a large segment of the population. In 1822, Sligo's Town Board of Health received a total of £2,000 in grant for the fitting up of a fever hospital and the creation of employment for the poor. A workhouse had been established sometime before 1739 on the south side of Chapel Street, near where Joe lived, exactly where the barracks is. Well, a little bit out onto the road from where the barracks was. And that was described by a visitor in 1739 as a large workhouse for disorderly persons. The building was extensively repaired in 1767 and converted into a county infirmary, and it remained as Sligo's hospital until the building of the new county infirmary, which was constructed on an isolated site on the Mall between 1813 and 1816. This hospital took its first patients in 1818, and with a small building sufficient for only 60 patients, but it was doubled in size some 60 years later. Now I'll go back to that one in a minute, but that's actually the original county infirmary. And for some of you who might be old enough to remember what it looked like in its heyday, does anybody old enough to remember the county hospital like that? I'm not. It was demolished in 69.
That was the nurses' quarters in
No,
Cranmore.
with the modern block to the right of the 1940 building. You know where
Was it not up to the back?
that's the fever hospital. That was the fever.
They
Yeah.
called that the old hospital.
The old hospital, yeah.
That's what
So
they
that
called
was
it.
there up to 1969, and the fact that they demolished it, I think, is horrendous. But this is what it looked like originally. This is the original architectural drawing for a much plainer building, but it was a very substantial building for Sligo to have in 1816.
Why was it not?
Why was it not? Oh, because
Oh, no, it's-
1969. Oh, we it's an old building. We need to put a new one. The building, what they call the building
Yeah,
where
the-
outpatients
The
is.
square yoke.
Yeah, with the wings was on it.
Yes,
Yeah.
they built it up, and they demolished that.
Would they not keep nurses in that up to about 1969?
No, the fever hospital. I remember
Was
we
the
drove
nurses
to see
up
the fever
there at the
hospital.
back?
There's the fever
Very
hospital.
Well, this is in between, was it?
Behind, you see, I'll show you the photograph in a minute.
Behind it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's the fever hospital, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's from the Kilgallen collection. That's the fever hospital around 1890, obviously with nurses. And the fever hospital was constructed a distance to the rear of the county infirmary in 1822 and replaced a small building which had been on an isolated headland west of the modern Markovich House. The construction of the fever hospital was hastened by the severe outbreak of fever in 1817, and it was financed jointly by the Grand Jury, that's kind of like the county council, and Mr. Edward Singh Cooper, who was the local MP, Coopers of Markery Castle. The new hospital, the fever hospital, was a commodious 3-storey building occupied in May 1822 and 1822 and contained 38 beds, which was later increased to 50. And the initial staff consisted of a doctor, Dr. Henry Irwin, a matron, nursing staff and servants. And the nursing staff were really like carers. There was no professional nurses at the time. And the first patients in 1822 to the fever hospital were from the typhus fever. And that's just a nice little... And what you can see there, in 1831 there was 2 surgeons, 5 doctors and 5 apothecaries. An apothecary is what we would call a chemist, but in the 1830s, apothecaries could actually do small minor medical procedures. They could diagnose as much. And there was a lot of controversy going on at the time with the Royal College of Surgeons about whether apothecaries could be licensed to do certain things. And there was you can see it in the papers, people saying, oh, he's only an apothecary, and stuff like that. So, Joe, that might help you to click your mind. There's Cholera Church, so you can see the county infirmary with the fever hospital behind. And I just wanted to we've lost that sense of where the buildings were, because the hill has been so, I suppose, ground down in the last number of years. And then just to go back.
So just go back to that photograph thing, if you want to. So when you look at that now, we were up in the. So where's the man? There's
Cholera
Church, yeah.
So obviously where we were 2 weeks ago wasn't built yet.
Well, you see the model school on the corner, right?
Just on the very corner there.
You see the model is right in the
model.
Yeah, that's the model.
All right.
So the Mason Hall wasn't built at that stage.
18. When was the Santa called? About 1901, wasn't it, or so?
I'm not sure, but it's that
those
few houses
Those houses there now, Albert, just up from the
they're the back of the houses that, like Dormant and Heritage.
Yeah, they're still there.
They're still there.
Oh, that's this side of the land. Oh, yeah, sorry, we're looking at it from a two-dimensional. Okay, yeah.
Now that's a shot. That's an enlargement from a big photograph that was taken from the cathedral tower, from St. John to the cathedral tower as well. But I just think it really kind of illustrates it, And they were very isolated out there, the 2 hospitals, And well, like go on then. You have the evidence. We keep at it, so you can read through that, and that kind of give you some idea on it. In common with other provincial towns, there was widespread agitation in anticipation of the cholera, and the Sligo Journal reported that a number of ignorant and infatuated persons were going about from house to house distributing straws and recommending the utterance of prayers. And what this is really is some of this folk kind of religious and folk religion stuff, where you would maybe burn straws and then pass the ashes around. They're very much kind of almost pre-Christian, but kind of under a Christian guise on it. On the 10th of August, about 1,500 people flocked to Sligo trying to resist the meeting of the Board of Health. The crowd, who were mostly poor, thought that an extra tax was to be imposed on them for the purpose of paying the cholera doctors, and they actually thought the cholera doctors were spreading the cholera just to get money. So there was a huge amount of suspicion going around it. So the Provost was able to disperse the crowd by explaining that this was simply untrue. Sligo was ripe for an attack of the epidemic because there was only a few short and low volume sewers, mostly of the drain variety, and all of these discharged down Water Lane or Tubbergall Lane into the River Garavogue. The water of the river, of course, was used frequently by the townspeople for drinking water and also for culinary preparation, and they watered their vegetables with it, so they affected even the food they ate, And most of the town supply, water supply also came from several wells, such as the Lungy Well and the well in the Tubbergall Lane. And if there chanced to be a long continuance of dry weather, there was not a drop of drinkable water in the town. And men with horses and carts containing barrels distributed water from door to door, selling it by the gallon. So there was a problem with supply of water. Because yourself, when there's dry weather, you go water across the Garavogue, all the town wells had been declared unfit for use in 1826 by the medical officer. The Tubbergall Lane well was closed, and the Lungy well was declared unfit for human consumption. But due to force of pressure, they opened up again because there simply was no other water supply.
The drank it ain't not contaminated.
Yeah, but it wasn't as contaminated as with Holland. So, like if you or I go to India and we have something with water, and I was in Albania 2 years ago, and I thought the water was fine until every six of us were all kind of going, oh, and the locals weren't affected by this at all. And it's just, you think it's coming out of the mountain, it's fresh, but because the sheep have been at it, and we're not used to that level, we're used to such a level of clean water. Yeah. So the locals had an immunity to it. Yeah. So these people would have an immunity, but nobody had immunity to the cholera. So when did it hit Sligo? So the first case was at Mannionstown, at the end of July, right? Visitors from Longford, they came to take the sea water in Longford. They came, and you know where Marion's town is out there in the Grand Hill. And on the 11th of August, 12 patients were admitted to the fever hospital. 10 of them died the following day, right? And on August the 24th, which was only really, less than 10 days later, 61 people died in one day. Now, can you imagine if 61 people died in Ireland in one day? To be an international emergency. This was 61 people who died on the 24th of August. The fever hospital was utterly overwhelmed, and what they did, they erected these temporary canvas tents or sheets between the infirmary and the fever hospital. There's a big field between them. And that was where they literally brought in people, put them on makeshift cots, and then when they died, they took them out again. All the businesses closed, and most of the inhabitants, about 10,000 people left the town. They literally went outside into the countryside, and very wealthy people would pay £50, imagine £50, for a room in Ballisnera, Colooney, because they were considered to be safe. Most people just camped out underneath the hedges, and there's a great description of somebody coming to town and seeing everybody. If anybody is old enough to remember when the travellers used to have the little tents that they had, and literally that's what they lived in underneath the hedges, because they were so afraid of being in the town. And in a way that was self-quarantine, so they actually probably did protect themselves. No food, no fresh milk, and the town was blockaded. So the main road to Donegal was blocked, and they dug ditches across the road in order to stop supplies of food and really to stop people coming out. So the people who went out to the countryside were really like urban refugees going out to the countryside, and they weren't really wanted, So that's just something. So how did they bury all these people? What did they do with them? So they could, first of all, initially they tried burying them in the abbey, which is the traditional burial ground, but it simply became overwhelmed. The bodies were decomposing so fast that the stench from the abbey was unbearable, even in Castle Street, you could smell it, because this smelled it 6 months later. And the Board of Health kicked in and said, no, we have to dispose of them properly. So they dug a huge cholera trench behind the fever hospital, which was there untouched and unloved, but was still in its perfect sense until 1982 when they built the orthopaedic unit over most of it, okay? And that's something I'm involved in at the minute. We're trying to do kind of a proper survey of what's left of it, and also to kind of commemorate the people who are actually in it. But about at least 400 people died in that, probably, including Surgeon William Bell, who died along with his patients. He's the only person that we know
Nobody knew who their names were.
Beg your pardon?
Nobody knew their names.
No, there's no record of the names, unfortunately. But we do know the only person we know that's in it is Surgeon William Bell, and he died while tending the patients. He was a former army surgeon, and they know there's a report to Dublin Castle where somebody wrote saying, they dug a pit behind the hospital. The scenes of grief were extraordinary, and they dug a pit behind the hospital, and they wrapped people in pitch sheets, and along with them they buried Surgeon William Bell, who died serving the patients. And I think the only person we know that's buried in it, And they didn't initially they started off with coffins, and then they ran out of wood effectively, So am I painting a good picture for you?
Very interesting.
That's the Sligo. I think this is very interesting, the headline, because this is August the 10th. This is just before the cholera. The cholera hit the next day. So on the left you can see prevention of cholera, how to prevent it. And then there's an auction to be sold at Ardnaree. Then there's the electors of the boroughs of Sligo. And then there's the Sligo School of, Principal, the public half yearly, whatever, it's a school, So life goes on, and then the theatre on the right hand side. So I think that's to say, the cholera coming, but look what's on in the theatre, So
I worked for Mr. Carl in Temple Street.
Yeah.
And when he got sick, I was cleaning out his room for the doctor, and under the bed was a case full of the Sligo Journal, old Sligo champions, really old from the beginning. What did I do? Took them all and threw them out, rolled them up and threw them out in the bin because they were no good.
And
when I think of it now,
well, there's huge gaps in the journal, where there's no paper to survive. There's gaps of a couple of years, made my day now.
You lost that history.
You could have had them out into the bin. Your job is right.
You made my day.
Cleaning.
That time you had tried to
we all the amount of stuff in later years that we got rid of too, and no respect.
And look, I was talking to somebody when somebody took over, was it Arguing Fibs? in the 70s. I mean, they got a skip and cleared out all the old stuff. And I mean, they were that was just the thing.
Is right.
That's just a little tool. That might help you visualise. So the infirmary, if you can imagine that, if you go up to the hospital, those two little see the little pillars at the bottom of it here. See these little here. This is the charter school, right? And these are little pillars. If you look where you drive into the pretty outpatient places there, some of those are still there. There was a little kind of a gatehouse there. So the infirmary, you see the picture of the infirmary. The infirmary was there. And you see this big gap between it and the fever hospital. That was deliberate in order to isolate fever patients. And the fever hospital, they were quite well equipped. Their dry toilets and that were on the back of it so that they didn't come down towards the main infirmary. They were quite clever. And there was a dispensary. So the dispensary was where you went. I mean, we were old enough to remember dispensaries, but they weren't quite as, they were well visited. There's a whole other history on Irish dispensaries from 1801 onwards. So there was a kind of a rudimentary care system in Ireland that didn't exist in England or Wales, you know. So how did they get ready for it? So they divided the town into three districts, and to each of which a hospital would be attached. This was the Cholera Board. The Cholera Board was composed of sort of well-off businessmen, of both denominations. It didn't matter whether they were Catholic or Protestant, but clergymen weren't allowed to serve on it. No particular reason, but I think they just thought it was easier if there was no infighting on it, you know. So every town had a Cholera Board, or every district. So Sligo had one for Sligo town. They proposed to set up a third temporary cholera hospital at the St. John's Parochial School, which is the St. John's Hall next door to where St. John's Church is now. But the inhabitants of John Street objected so bad to this and blocked the street that they gave up on trying to put a hospital there, and they erected the tent between the fever hospital and the infirmary. The board paid for the employment of a number of able and active persons, male and female, to carry into effect the orders of the board, mostly as painters for whitewashing and as extra staff at the fever hospital. So they bought 700 and I think 80 barrels of lime. I have this somewhere. In the run-up to the cholera outbreak. So in June 1832, 761 barrels of lime were expended in whitewashing 1,371 houses within the borough. Why did they whitewash the houses? Because they knew it promoted cleanliness. They didn't really know why.
It killed the lime.
Why? But why? Think about it. Why lime? Lime kills off.
Lime kills.
Lime has mild antibacterial properties. They didn't really understand it at the time, but they knew it worked. And of course, cleanliness was next to godliness. So I mean, this worked on it. So where did they get the money to do all this? You're saying, well, you know, who gave the money? So because this was, and people didn't have money, and this is just tells you on it. So these are grants. So a total of 140,000 was given to the local cholera board by the central board. The central board was in Dublin. So you see the town. Sligo's about halfway down the list. Sligo got almost £4,000 to help with the famine, and that is about £400,000 in today's economic value. Now, if the town got £400,000 tomorrow morning, we'd be all going yippee. That was a huge amount of money to get. So by saying that the government or the British government didn't throw money at this, they actually did. They threw a huge amount of money at it. Often it was in the form of kind of central loans that might have to be paid back, but in the end, a lot of them really weren't paid back through local taxes because it simply couldn't be, you know. So you can see that medical officers, there was no medical officers in Sligo, but they got money for medical officers as well.
Leitrim got Friday.
Or Leitrim, still getting.
Leitrim County only got 200. I put that in deliberately, yeah.
Yeah.
So you difference.
That's terrible.
I'm sure they must have been hit by cholera too.
Say again?
They must have been hit by
Well,
cholera.
But it's mostly an urban disease.
It would be
smaller,
very
towns.
small.
Yeah. So and Leitrim didn't get hit until the spring of 1833, like 6 months later. But it's because it's an urban. It's where people are living close together. Where there's a lot of poo. Literally, it sounds a bit funny, but you know, it's really out in the countryside, people would just go
in the field,
you know, in the field, and it's dissipated. But in a town, if you see the pictures of those houses, if you were pooing and it gets thrown out onto the street, it's there in front of you.
It's there and it's thrown back in, it's thrown back in again for the rain.
Exactly on it. So the whole amount of money spent in Ireland for that particular period was almost 14 million pounds sterling in today's worth, and that's a huge amount of money on it, you know. So how are we doing on time, lads? We're not too bad. I just wanted to put in about clergymen. There was a lot of I suppose, stories going around about different clergy. So the bottom guy there, Thomas Gilrod, was the curate at Suey, and he was a volunteer. He actually volunteered to serve at the fever hospital, where he was almost guaranteed to die. But he actually escaped the fever. And he stayed in the fever hospital for right throughout the 6 weeks. And his job was to stop the almost dead people being dragged down the stairs, big stone steps that you see in front of the fever hospital, where they were dragged down the steps because they weren't really dead, or they were nearly dead, but they were being dragged out to be thrown into the pit to make room for the next person, right? Now, the people who were doing this, who was doing this? What happened, first of all, 7 doctors died, all the normal medical staff died with the fever, and the board of health hired literally anybody they could find, and most of those they could find were drunk and disorderly, men and women, and they were just chancing it because they thought the whiskey would protect them, and they really couldn't even tell whether somebody was dead or alive. So they just, when somebody looked like they were dead, they dragged them out. So there's great stories of Father Gilligan going after them with his horsewhip and take them back until he actually died. And there's quite a number of stories of one man came looking for his wife, and he knew he had tied a red handkerchief around her neck, and that she was in the pit, and she was supposed to be dead, and he went in after her in a sheer sort of desperation, and he pulled her out, and she actually came to, and she lived and survived. It was very difficult to actually tell. Yeah, and there was another guy called Long John. He was an ex-army guy. When they tried to put him into the coffin, they actually had a coffin for him. They had to break his legs. He was so long. When they hit him with the mallet, he woke up, and he lived for many years. So there was quite a lot of what would you call it? There was quite a lot of superstition is the wrong word. Talk around that the Catholic clergy were able to escape the disease, and that the Protestant clergy weren't. But that would be very typical of the time. You know what I mean? There was a lot of to and fro, and it was a lot of stories about it. But mostly the one that I found quite emotional, and I got quite a little bit about it, he was the Baptist minister, he's Reverend Josiah Wilson. Now there was half a dozen Baptists in Sligo in 1832, and he wasn't made terribly welcome by the Anglican minister, because you have to understand the context of the time. I mean, there was a lot of, if anybody's heard of the Tractarian or the Oxford movement in the Church of Ireland now, Joe's nerdy enough to might have heard of that. That was a big reform movement in the 1830s, sorry Joe. And that was creating a lot of, conflict, but a lot of pull within the Church of Ireland as well. And then you had these non-conformists, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Independents, the Congregationalists, and they were being very evangelical, and they were being sent out to all these provincial towns. So there wasn't just kind of tension between Catholics and Protestants, which is what we think, but there was actually a lot of internal tension between the Protestant denomination and in Catholicism itself at the time. So you have to look at this in the back. What these men did was they went out and they ministered to anybody, because people literally fell on the street. And Josiah Wilson had a young wife and 5 children who had a bookshop in Castle Street, and he died in agony. Now that's not that's not his. There's a. If I pull out the full quote out of that, that's just one quote. It's written, a little obituary written by the man, a friend of his who stayed with him while he was dying, and he died in agony, and he was a young man. And then they set up a kind of a fund in town to try and get some money for his wife, that she could go back to her people with the 5 children, and they managed to sell the shop. So that was quite a cross-community thing, And Reverend William Armstrong would have been, he was 45 years curate in St. John, and he was worn out, he almost died, and from kind of going around the different people. He took anybody off the street, try and bring them to the hospital, try and bring them home, and he got very sick, but he actually lived. So it's an interesting, that's a whole different lecture, different sort of, how different...
There's somebody at the door again, sorry. Somebody knocking.
Somebody knocking there, is there? Yeah. So, and then if you can just imagine, this is an Italian cholera cart, but that's literally, they went around the town with the cholera cart, and they said literally, bring out your dead,
Right.
And they carted them off. If they were dead, they brought them straight to the cholera pit. If there was health inspectors who went around the town. This is always in a very short 6-week period, and if they were considered to have cholera, they were removed to the cholera hospital as well. And this is another little drawing.
Sorry, anyone here driving a Volkswagen Passat?
Passat, I'm a Tiguan, no?
Volkswagen.
It's a VW, but it's not a Passat. It's a Tiguan, it's white.
Volkswagen, no.
They vote, so yeah.
That's
Volkswagen.
All of them.
I'm a white car if it's me.
Look,
No,
look,
it's got it,
look.
got it, got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
No, it's okay, yeah, sorry, it's not, no.
So that's one of those little medical drawings from the 1820s
Oh,
as
look
well,
at that.
of a young girl before the cholera and after the cholera. You know, she obviously wouldn't be holding her head like that, but it just kind of gives an idea of how the gaunt expression and the blue lips and the blue thing. And you heard me talking about how the abbey was overflowing. This is actually a drawing from 1858 of the cloisters in the abbey, and it looks very different now because it was all cleared out in the 1880s. So they literally buried a lot of people, not in the cloisters. The cholera victims were buried in a pit probably towards the back of it, try and keep them away from the main body of the building.
Was that a marked grave or anything?
Mass grave in yeah.
What is it, was it
In
marked?
the abbey. No, it's not marked, which
It's
is
outside
literally
the
a
grounds,
pit.
it's outside the main church, isn't it?
If you look at it, it's down in the corner nearly going on to
Yeah.
Corcoran's Mall down
Yeah.
that direction. It's down at the back. And remember, the whole abbey was levelled. They took a load of earth out in the 1880s. And I put this one in, that's St. John's Church, another beautiful little drawing done in 1858 before there was photographs. So there's that jumble of tomb, tabletops.
And it's just like that today.
And it's like that today. And St. John's had 83 burials in the space of the 6 weeks. And they're the only real recorded burials in town, including William Middleton. And William Middleton, as we know, was W.B.A.'s grandfather. And he went out, he left his house in Wine Street to visit the dead house of Peter O'Connor's brother, a guy called Patrick O'Connor, and they were the big Catholic merchants in town. And William Middleton was obviously Church of Ireland. He went out to pay his respects to visit the dead house, and on his way back, somebody, he thinks a poor man lying in the gutter outside his house in Wine Street. He picked him up, he brought him into his house, and both William Middleton and the poor man were dead by the next morning, just like that, you know. So, and he's buried in the corner there, but that's how quick it was. It was highly infectious, you know. And, you know, there's lots of reports. In this town of Cholera Mundalat, Mr. John Black, an active and efficient member of the board of health. What they don't tell you is John Black probably was a very good smuggler as well. John Black is the ancestor of a guy called, he's a very famous, well, in Mountaineering circles, he was Patrick Sims. He was a climber in Donegal in the 1960s and 70s, and ended up being involved he was accidentally targeted in a bomb. He was in a car outside Derry. He was blown up, and this guy was his great-great-grandfather. I always think the little connections are very interesting over the period of years. And he was in this case of mistaken identity as well, if there's ever such a thing for bombings, but I mean, that's just a thing. So many local men died, prominent local men like William Middleton, John Black, the publisher Alexander Bolton, who owned the Sligo Chronicle, and his wife took over the business afterwards, which is very interesting from that point of view. Elizabeth, the eldest daughter of William Middleton, Arabella Supple, you could keep going on, George, I can't remember the knife there, and so on. That's the report. That's the reports from the paper every day. Daily round of the town by the sanitary inspectors, and they removed the very ill to the hospital. And of course, Surgeon Bell and Dr. Coyne. So for seven doctors to die, that's a huge amount. And this is an interesting little fact. This is the. Oh, don't follow that. Thank you. That's the Fever Hospital. And you see the photograph there. Actually, this one, Joe. Here's the next one. Does that give you a better idea of where it was? There's the new, what I call it, the 1947 building, right? You know and behind it then to the back is the Fever Hospital, and that's the ground between it. That was taken in 1955.
The dispensary, I think, was on the right.
Did it?
The dispensary.
The dispensary was on the right, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I don't remember this, but I do remember the Fever Hospital.
Yeah.
So if you keep that picture in mind there, and then you look behind it, and this burial ground was very clearly marked. Any line in pink on this particular map means that it's a masonry wall, and it was walled in 1848, and a gate put on it. And I remember being brought up to see the Fever Hospital burning down. My father obviously had very little else to do except, come on, put on your coat, we go up and see the Fever Hospital. 1978, you know. But what else would you do in town, you know?
There you go.
And a bit of excitement.
Up to the Fever.
I was very excited by it all. I was about 11, right? I was like, oh my God, I was late were coming out, and half the town was there looking at it. But, you know, but there was no colour television, that's all I can say, you know. So, most of the cholera field was bulldozed in the 1980s, which is very sad, I think. There was a lot of, in fact, Ray McGarry got involved in the argument in 1979 or 1980 in the Sligo champion. He was still on the council at the time, but before he was, I think he was still on the council before he became prominent in government, about whether they should abolish the fever hospital or not. But for the health board at the time, it was just falling down. They really didn't have much of a choice, and it was considered to be a British thing, we get rid of it.
Yeah.
But nobody really knew the proper history of it, that it was built to serve the people of the town and to serve the poor people of the town, and it should have been preserved. And that's very typical of that sort of paint everything with the one brush. The history is much more nuanced than the black and white that we sort of like to believe, and that's what I get.
But it made way, I suppose, for where the hospital is.
Well, the
now.
orthopaedic wing was built there. So is that progress? Is it not? Can you work around it? I like to think you can work around these buildings, but unfortunately they did the same in Britain, and they demolished things left, right and centre. It was the 60s. It had to be new and square and concrete, and cold. So it's not about, and one of my big projects at the minute, we're trying to, we didn't get it, we hope to get a grant to do it, but we didn't. We hope to get one in the new year from the council. About 2,500, we want to try and survey what's left of the burial ground with some of the archaeological students in the IT, and then that won't get built on. The little bit that's left of, there's only about maybe a third of that left, that will remain, even if a new hospital gets built and the multi-storey car park gets built around it, that can remain as a little memorial and a little peaceful little fort, even if it's only an internal triangle on it, and that's.
So we fighting on that one.
That's the next one. And I just want to kind of, I think we're nearly finished up. What we never really think about is what was in the original United Kingdom, so Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales together before, the original UK, as they say. And the phrase the UK, was never really used on the last 20 years. It's always Britain. So the United Kingdom was considered to be sort of the first part of the title. It was always just called Britain, which, anyway, that's neither here nor there. So Ireland, if you look at the population, the chart on the right-hand side, the population of Ireland in 1831 was 7.7 million. England and Wales had only 13.8 million. So Ireland's population was half of that of England and Wales. Scotland only had a tiny percent of it. So of the United Kingdom, the population of Ireland was 32%. That's over almost a third, isn't it? Which is, it's big. But look at the percentage on the chart on the left. 45% of all the UK cholera deaths took place in Ireland. So Ireland had proportionately more deaths than England, Wales and Scotland. And I think that's very interesting. And this is just the same chart with numbers instead on it, with the percentage of mortality. And you can see Ireland's mortality percentage with 0.33%. So that's the highest of, not quite as high as Scotland, but in numbers it's 25,000. And that was actually all that were officially recorded. But the 1841 census, which draws on newspaper report, put it at 50,000, and it's probably probably higher. And this is just a chart. If you're not into epidemics, this is just the number of dead who died each day. The red is those who were the new cases, and the yellow is those who died. And if anybody, the lecture was given last week, there was a load of people who knew more about this epidemic than I. That's what's called a classic epidemic chart, where it sweeps up into a huge crescendo, and then it flops off, and then it sort of dribbles for a few days. And I was very excited that they thought it was exciting, because I did this from the actual numbers, so it was kind of proof that my work was right. It's all about that you're right. And just if you look at these two charts contain the same figures. On the left hand side, they're sorted by the percentage of mortality. In other words, what percent of those who got sick died. And Sligo was third. So 47% of all those who got sick died. Right? It's third highest in Ireland. But in the right hand chart you can see the actual number, which is 700. The only thing that's higher than Sligo was 5,700 in Dublin, 1,600 in Cork, 1,100 in Limerick. Sligo was the fourth highest town in the whole island to have the numbers of people dying. And those are low numbers. I think the number is closer to 1,000, to be honest with you. So, and if you look what I put in for contrast, Leeds and Manchester. Leeds and Manchester in the 1830s were big places, and they had only 700 odd people dying, which is a lot less than Sligo. So it was, and I'm going to finish on this. These are all the old sewers in the town. These ones I found by accident because we're digging a hole in Charlotte Street, and that's the original stone culvert. So it was literally built of stone, covered with a flagstone, and then the road was put over it. That's still there, and that's still functioning in Charles Street. That was built in 1835. These are currently from the county council, And when we no, remember, was it last year or the year before when they dug up every street in the town and they were putting in the new sewers? There are the Victorian sewers that were built between 1840 and 1880. There was about 21 miles of sewers built in Sligo to get rid of poo, right? For want of a better word, right?
How many miles?
About 21 miles, Joe. Look in the book. It's in the book somewhere. I think under Wine Street you might get it. They're taken with a camera, but they're beautiful Victorian arch sewers, and they're still functioning in some of the streets. That one they broke.
Look at that.
Like the one in O'Connell Street. They had to break that in order to, because what happened was people had put so many sewers, it decided that it was actually collapsing. I think that's still under O'Connell Street, down the middle of it, and that was built in about 1848. And this is the one outside the courthouse. And if you look carefully, you can see where they're actually digging it up to put in those new pipes. And in one sense, the way it's sad to see them gone, because they were functioning absolutely perfectly, but they don't really fit into any modern. You can't put other junctions into them. That's the problem. And that I took that one specifically because I think. And what you're asking me, what effect did all that have? That's Kinsella Reservoir, built in 1884. And it brought the clean piped water all the way to the corner of the Mall there. You know, the Feely's corner of the Mall. That was the first fountain in town. That was clean water, it was fresh water, and they opened fountains all over the town. There's one of them still in Mahraboy, Joe, if I'm right, out at Mahraboy. There's one little lion's head on it there. And so that water came all the way to Kinsella. That's being upgraded to Kinsella Reservoir. It cost £18,000, which was a lot of, but it was one of the best municipal reservoirs in Ireland or Britain at the time when it was built, because the water was so clean, and it still functions perfectly well today. It was redone about 5 years ago, and anybody on the north side of the town, you get your water from there, and it's filtered at Farnacardy for anybody who's there. Love it. And I think, let me see, that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's just a little, life returned to normal after the 21st of September. The epidemic was over. There was, up to 700 people dead. People came back to the town very slowly. The business is open, but you can imagine what the devastation was like. That is the Garavogue. That's the little the gatehouse, and that's a beautiful little drawing, 1858. And somebody pointed out to me, I wouldn't even think of this. This woman's dress is absolutely bang on for that particular period, around 1850. That sort of crinoline with all the layers and parasols. This is somebody who obviously knows a little bit more about this than me. She pointed out about that. You nearly know with that when you see
Thank you for joining us for the Harmony of History podcast series. Our second episode will be released on Thursday the 30th of April, and we hope you will join us once again. Our guest will be Dr. John O'Callaghan. Dr. John O'Callaghan is the Adult and Community Education Officer in the Centre for Lifelong Learning, St Angela's College, Sligo. John is a historian of modern Ireland, and his research looks at the Irish education system, the Irish Revolution of the early 20th century, and its impact on individuals and communities, and sports history. We hope you take care, and we'll tune in again next week.